News that impacts you and your community. 13 on Your Side Evening Plus starts now.
Hi, everyone, and welcome into Evening Plus. I'm Julia Gorman. We're so glad you're with us here on 13 Plus as we continue our coverage tonight into the trial of Christopher Schurr. And we'll also have some regular news for you tonight as we await a verdict. Here's a quick look at what we will talk about. First, we'll hear from our Kelly Lichter, our Riley Mack, and our Josh Albertus about deliberation as it continued into a second day today in the trial of former Grand Rapids police officer Christopher Schurr. Then we saw a pretty good showing of protesters outside. At times, things were heated. There was tension into just the last couple of hours, so we will hear from Josh on that. The Real ID deadline is here, so if you don't have a star on your license, we're going to tell you what exactly you need to know about that and how it could impact travel. Nurses Week is this week. We are appreciating nurses here in our community. We have a great story from our Elena Holland. And then the weather over the next week looks impeccable, so Blake will join us with that really great news. First, though, we want to start with the Schurr trial, the Christopher Schurr trial. Again, the former Grand Rapids police officer charged with secondary murder in the death of Patrick Loyola. This happened 3 years ago in April of 2022 when a traffic stop turned into a struggle, turned into a deadly shooting. Today, the jury continued to deliberate after beginning deliberations just early yesterday afternoon. This afternoon, the jury came into the courtroom telling the judge they were unable to reach a verdict. The judge, Christina Mims, she denied a motion for a mistrial and sent those jurors back to deliberate with instructions to continue what they've been doing for the last day and a half or so. 13 on Your Side's Kelly Lichter joins us now with a look at what else we saw happen and some analysis of today. Kelly.
Julia, so the judge actually gave the jury what's called an Allen instruction, and essentially, in more casual terms, she was like, no, you should try your best to come to, conclusion or come to a verdict. And what we could be seeing there is guilty of second-degree murder, which was the original charge, guilty of voluntary manslaughter, which was introduced yesterday, Monday, or he's acquitted. The Allen instruction is really so these jurors avoid a hung jury. So they did come back deadlocked, but that's something that's a little bit different than a hung jury. Deadlocked is, they can't come to, a single verdict. They're deadlocked on the situation. A hung jury is when they absolutely say we cannot come to a verdict. We have to call a hung jury, and at that point it's up to Kent County Prosecutor Chris Becker in this case to either call another trial, have a retrial, to offer a reduced plea deal, or just not try it at all. So you can't be in the jurors' heads. I mean, we have a profile of who the 12 people are, originally 14, but there was 2 alternates who were chosen and were dismissed, at the end of the trial. So, we know roughly who these 12 people are, but you can never truly get into the head of a juror, what they're thinking back there. Again, they have 3-4 outcomes that they're deliberating on right now, and there's no timeline to come to a deliberation either. So it could be, tomorrow morning when we come in, there could be a verdict, or we could still wait a couple more days. I talked to a legal expert today about, what are these jurors doing while they're in that deliberation room, and, what can we expect in the next coming days as we await the verdict?
I can remember times when I was still trying cases where we were waiting for the jury to deliberate and you could literally hear them arguing through the door. So it can happen that there are heated discussions, but you'll recall that one of the instructions the judge gave just before she sent them back to the jury room was, first thing you should do is select a jury foreperson, and that person is charged with the responsibility of organizing and guiding the discussions as the jury reviews the evidence. Now, in this case, the judge allowed them to take notes. So that could elongate the process just a little bit, because if people took down different notes, right? So their notes don't agree and they're trying to figure out what the witness really said, that could take longer as well. But most jurors report that they start by taking an initial vote to see if they already agree. And usually they don't. And so then they start going through the evidence. Most of the jurors that I've talked to after the fact say that they start going through the witness testimony and the exhibits right, to discuss what all of that means and how they think that weighs toward one verdict or another. But given the nature of the case, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some very pointed, if not heated, conversations about what the appropriate outcome in this case should be.
And Julia, over the past couple of days of the trial, which lasted, into 6 days essentially, you saw both witnesses from the defense and the prosecution almost contradicting each other. And I mean, that's the way that the trial goes. You have the prosecution trying to prove one thing and then the defense arguing against that thing. Again, like we've been saying, Christopher Schurr is innocent until proven guilty, and that burden falls onto the prosecution. And so talking to legal experts like Tanya, who you just heard from, they've been saying, it could be hard for the jury to come up with a decision because you're hearing, two sides of what happened and two almost justifications of why we're here. So there's definitely a lot to go through, a lot of exhibits of evidence to go through, and a lot of witnesses. We heard from over 20 witnesses over the past 6 days. And mind you, unlike the media, all of us in the media room on the 5th floor, we're allowed to, use our laptops, use our phones, kind of discuss it with other people who are in the media room. These jurors haven't been allowed on social media, haven't been able to look at the case. They have their notes, and now they're talking to their fellow jurors. They don't have time to look things up and do extra analysis, and that's also just so they only see what was presented at the trial. They're not allowed to look at other things that have been excluded from the trial. They're only supposed to make this decision based on what they've heard over the past week. And so it'll be really interesting to see what is that outcome. And again, just to repeat what we could be seeing in the next couple of days as we anticipate this verdict. You have either guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of voluntary manslaughter. They could acquit, sure, or it could be a hung jury, which, goes into the retrial, all those different options, Julia.
Kelly, I so appreciate you walking us through that. And again, this is also day 6 for you and for Josh and for Riley as you guys continue to be there and watching and interpreting every moment. Really appreciate your analysis there. And we know that you will be at the courthouse once again bright and early tomorrow morning. Kelly, thank you. And just for a little recap on timeline here, jury deliberations started just about 12:45 yesterday, Monday, so early afternoon. They went through the remainder of the day. The judge then cut them loose between the 4:30 and 5 o'clock mark, and then they picked back up early this morning. They deliberated all day. We had them come out to the judge mid this afternoon. They were sent back to continue deliberating, and then they were sent home for the day just in the last hour and a half or so. So deliberations will continue into a third day tomorrow. And of course, the big moment today was what we saw this afternoon with the jurors when they came out to the judge. Our team of reporters, again, staked at the courthouse for every single moment, and our Riley Mack was there when that deadlock situation unfolded. She joins us now live downtown as well. Riley, what was the reaction that you were able to see? I know you guys are in the media room, but also sometimes in the hallways. What were you able to see and gather, when that news did drop?
Yeah, like you said, Julia, it's been a really long day. We've had, just roughly around 10 hours of jury deliberation so far. I got here to get in line to get into the courtroom at 8 a.m. this morning. As we've said before in this trial, the courtroom is really small. It's 44 seats, and a large percent of those are reserved for the family. So I had to wait in line to get a seat in that room starting at 8 a.m. and then I waited all day till 3 p.m. when they finally said we have an update. So we all gathered into the courtroom. I noticed, Christopher Schurr was sitting there, sitting very still in his seat in the courtroom. Some of his loved ones were praying in that moment. Patrick Lioya's family came in. They were just waiting for the judge, looking ahead, waiting for what was going to come next. The judge came in a few minutes later. She said the jury is still deliberating. And in that moment, it was an audible gasp in the courtroom. There was some gasping, there was sighs, I saw one person roll their eyes. People are losing their patience a little bit after 10 hours of deliberation. But, the judge brought in the jury a few minutes later. We saw all the jury members file in, and she spoke to the jury and said, I really want a verdict to come out of this. She made it clear that, after a week of testimony, she wants to see something come out of this. And, you know, the jurors were really paying attention to her. Some were leaning forward, listening intently. Some even looked over to Schurr in those moments, and then they filed back out, and that was it. You know, the judge dismissed everyone, and, you know, we waited 10 hours for an update, and everything changed in the trial in 10 minutes. So that goes to show you, you know, how quickly things are changing in this trial.
Riley, I so appreciate that breakdown there and your analysis. I know here back in the newsroom, you know, as soon as we got word that something may have been happening, I know myself, our Micah Cho, you know, we were gearing up to come down for, you know, any aftermath that may come from a verdict. And then we're kind of directed back to the station when we learned, okay, it wasn't a verdict. It was learning about the deadlock situation. So yeah, it's an ever flowing case that we're just having to deal with, just like everyone at home. So thank you so much for that insight there into what that moment looked like. And you will, of course, also be there bright and early again tomorrow morning, Riley. Thank you. And the jury coming back with a deadlock so soon, some people may be wondering, you know, is this normal? And two attorneys that we spoke with today say this isn't uncommon, what we saw happen late this afternoon. Well, it doesn't happen in every trial. It happens enough where judges often have to tell juries to continue to deliberate when they do become deadlocked, what we saw happen here today. What is surprising is how quickly the jury came back deadlocked. One attorney we spoke with says the jury has a lot of evidence they have to go through, and not a lot of time had passed when they did come before the judge.
I'm a little surprised that with just this short amount of time deliberating that they've sent a note to the judge that they're deadlocked. There was a lot of expert testimony for them to go through in this particular case, and that really surrounded the main issue in the trial. So I thought that they would at least deliberate through the rest of the day and perhaps reach a verdict tomorrow or Thursday.
I know both attorneys we spoke with, Tanya there and also Andrew Rodenhouse, they both say this is a reminder that a deadlock decision, it's in no way an indication of which way jurors are thinking about this case. It also doesn't show how long they may continue to deliberate. We could see a verdict tomorrow. We could see several more days of deliberation. No one has that exact answer, you know, besides the jurors, if and when they do make a decision. Also, the judge can continue to ask the jury to continue with deliberations. This was what Callie was mentioning, even if they do come back with that deadlock again. So we could see a repeat of what happened this afternoon. Again, really only time will tell how long this will last as we technically go into an 8th day of trial tomorrow. A big point that we saw today as trial and deliberation did continue, supporters of both former officer Christopher Schurr and Patrick Loyola gathered outside the courthouse. They've been there since the start, but things kind of rose to a new level of heat and contention, if you will. Our Josh Albertus joins us now live downtown. He's been covering this topic for us. Josh, it appears behind you like things have settled a bit, but they were quite loud, quite rambunctious, you know, in the last couple of hours when you were live during our newscasts.
Yeah, compared to about 5 o'clock, Julia, this is a very quiet scenario right now. It really reached what I would describe as a new level of tension for this trial that we have not seen up until this point for the last week of this trial. I mean, obviously, we've had a lot of people on the sidewalk out here on the sidelines of the courthouse throughout this trial. Every single day, there were quite a few out. That first day, that last Monday, if you remember, making their voices heard, demonstrating, but up to this point, you know, there had not been this kind of tension before. Usually they had been these two distinct groups of supporters of former Officer Schurr and supporters of Patrick Loyola and the Loyola family, but today you kind of saw that tension boil over and the two groups merged together. That's where we saw police come into the equation. Grand Rapids police on bikes were over here on the terrace with us initially. They've been riding around the courthouse throughout the trial session, and they were here with us on the terrace, but then they moved over to sort of intervene, it looked like, in the meshing of the two crowds as it kind of boiled over, and they were there for a little bit. They also had bikers over here, police bikers over here from Wyoming PD as well as seeming backup, but then they kind of withdrew withdrew as that situation played out further. They kind of moved back here over to the terrace, and then they kind of withdrew from the scene, it seemed, altogether. But this was really a new level of tension. But we were already, there had been people, as there had been every single day up until this point. There were people outside this morning as well. Our team got to talk to a few people about why they were out here, why this continued to be important to them as we were still waiting for a verdict. Hear from some of those people and what they told us.
He had other choices to make. And I think that we need to see this, that there's accountability here, because otherwise, how do we trust a police force?
He was in the fight for his life. He did what he was trained to do. It is tragic that a young man lost his life, but he took that taser. Officer Schurr really thought he wouldn't have went home that day if he didn't do what he did.
So important for me to be out here because myself and other local activists have been demanding some accountability within the Grand Rapids Police Department, demanding that they do something about the rampant racism within the department.
Our law enforcement, they need us. It's a tough job. And he really, really felt in his heart, if he didn't do what he did, he wasn't going to go home that day to his wife.
What needs to happen is dialogue between the community and the police department, rather than, taking sides. But until that dialogue happens, there is going to be sides. And I, for one, am going to stand up and take a side.
If he's found not guilty, that doesn't mean he's a winner. There's no winners here. A young man lost his life. The whole situation is tragic.
And some of what we heard from there, some of what we saw earlier today when that tension sort of boiled over, what we were also hearing throughout the week was some hope as well that things would remain peaceful. But whether or not today is an indication of what will happen after the verdict is actually read. We obviously had, what may have been a verdict, but was not actually a verdict. What actually happens when the verdict is read, whether this is an indication of what's to come, I mean, that just remains to be seen. But from what we saw here today, the community is still very much in a demonstrating position and is very much involved in what happens in this case, Julia.
And Josh, we have some video that we only gathered sort of in the last hour from when you guys were out doing your live shots. We're going to include it in our 11 o'clock newscast for sure. But at one point we sort of saw police officers, both Grand Rapids and state police, kind of forming almost like a barrier with their bicycles, the officers who were on bikes. I believe you were out there kind of as this was happening. Correct me if I'm wrong, but can you walk us through that moment at all?
We kind of, I believe you're talking about the point where we saw them kind of have to intervene. Like I said, again, they were all over here where I'm standing right now on this terrace area across the street from the courthouse. And this is kind of where they were assessing the situation from. And when we started to see those two groups merge together and we started to see that kind of boiling point, that boiling over, is when they moved out and they went headed across the street to try and intervene there. A lot of Grand Rapids bike police tried to do that in that moment, but things just unfolded so quickly. Eventually, like I said, they ended up withdrawing after that, seemingly. I couldn't sit by the time we were in our later shows about 6 p.m. I couldn't see them in my line of sight anymore. Where they had gone, it was unknown to me at the time. And so what we saw there was kind of just them trying to intervene in the situation. It was very, very quickly unfolding.
Josh, we so appreciate you walking us through this. And as I've said twice already in the last 15 minutes, you will once again be continuing to add to our coverage as we continue deliberation tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And if you are just learning about the events of the trial, we are here to catch you up to speed if that's what you'd like. As the jury deliberates, you can watch all of our witness testimony that we've been streaming on our streaming app, 13+. We have all 6 days and into today, day 7, of video from the courtroom pinned at the bottom of the screen when you are on 13+. You can watch from the very beginning, and you can watch every single minute, every single hour if you'd like, or we have big moments clipped for you as well. We've also been doing recaps here on Evening Plus if you'd kind of like a look at the highlights of each day. And we will continue to do this until we have a verdict. So if you would like to get caught up from moment 1 to where we are now, that is all available on 13+. Download on your TV and watch for free.